Some places feel abandoned, and some places just feel like they're waiting. Above the New River sits St. Albans Sanatorium, a place that has watched more than a century of people come and go, and left behind stories that refuse to disappear. Long before it became known for whispers and empty hallways and unexplained encounters, this building started as a boys' school. But later these halls became home to psychiatric patients during a time when treatment could be isolating, painful, and sometimes deeply misunderstood. Behind these doors, people lived through fear, loss, hope, and treatment methods that would never happen today. Now the rooms sit empty, the beds are gone, the voices are gone. But if you ask the people who walk these halls today, they'll tell you something still feels off. Maybe it's the history, maybe it's the stories, or maybe some places absorb what happened inside them and never really let it go. Tonight we're stepping inside St. Albans Sanatorium to explore the history, the legends, and decide for ourselves. Is this just another abandoned building, or is it something still there? St. Albans was actually built in 1892, but if you fast forward about 70 years, in 1965, a major medical corporation bought the facility from the founding King family, who owned it at that time. By 1969, they executed a massive expansion. They didn't just build rooms, they built a modern assembly line for psychiatric care. They added a 2-story brick office building and a massive flat-roofed cafeteria section designed to feed 156 patients at the time. When the facility went dark in the early 2000s, this modern wing was abandoned alongside the 19th century wards. And today it stands as an eerie mid-century time capsule. So the King Center was actually the add-on, the newer addition. So let's jump back to the beginning. So in 1892, St. Albans was actually opened as a school for boys. And what happened to those kids is where the dark history really begins. The guy who ran the place, George Miles, wanted to build this prestigious school for wealthy Southern families, but he was completely obsessed with hyper-competition and sports. He basically encouraged brutal bullying to toughen the boys up. It was so toxic that kids were constantly dropping out because they couldn't take it anymore. Eventually, things got way out of hand. The pressure and abuse were so intense that multiple students actually ended up taking their own lives right inside the school. Once parents caught wind of the tragedies and the scandals, enrollment completely cratered, and they had to shut the whole place down by 1911. One of the most talked about and probably one of the saddest areas of the sanatorium is the suicide bathroom. And this is where there were at least 4 documented cases of young men, young boys, taking their lives because of the brutal bullying and torture they were enduring. Now, in the women's ward, the halls are tighter, the rooms are smaller, and whether that was intentional design, later modifications, or simply how the space ended up being used over time, it's not hard to notice the difference between the men and the women's wards. What's harder to ignore is the history behind who ended up here in places like this. By the early and mid-1900s, psychiatric hospitals across America often admitted huge numbers of women, and not always for reasons we'd recognize as psychiatric illness today. Women could be institutionalized for things that we would find quite unbelievable now, like severe grief, postpartum depression, anxiety, refusing traditional expectations, emotional outbursts, family conflict, or behavior considered improper at the time. That doesn't mean everyone here was wrongly admitted. Many patients genuinely needed care, but history shows that women's experiences inside institutions were often shaped by expectations that looked very different from what men experienced. Women who were seen as difficult, emotional, overwhelmed, rebellious, or simply not fitting social norms could end up being labeled as unstable more easily than men. And when you stand in a place like this, you start thinking less about ghosts and more about the actual people. How many women sat in these rooms wondering if anyone believed them? How many were homesick? How many thought they were coming home temporarily and realized they weren't leaving anytime soon? These rooms weren't just hospital rooms. For some people, they became their entire world. And whether you believe the stories people tell about this ward today or not, maybe the reason this area feels so heavy isn't because something stayed behind. Maybe it's because places like this remind us how differently people, especially women, were treated not that long ago. One such story is about a young woman named Rebecca, who was said to be a patient in the women's ward who became pregnant under traumatic circumstances. Different versions of the story say she either miscarried or lost the baby during her stay, and according to legend, she became attached to the remains and kept them in a jar, rocking and singing to it as if it were still alive. Staff supposedly removed it, and the story says she later died by suicide in the bathroom nearby. Sadly, there are many more stories like this one attached to St. Albans. Now, one detail that actually shows up in accounts of the building's history is that there were areas reserved for higher paying female patients. Stories describe those women receiving more privacy and more individualized care than patients in general population wards, which is a little unsettling when you think about mental health care becoming tied to money and status. There were a lot of treatments used in St. Albans that today we would look back on and they wouldn't be acceptable to our standards. One of those was hydrotherapy. Patients could be placed in bathtubs for hours, sometimes overnight, sometimes even longer. The goal was to calm anxiety, agitation, depression, or what doctors called overstimulation. Warm water was believed to relax the nervous system, while cold water was thought to reduce excitement and emotional distress. Hydrotherapy became common in psychiatric institutions in the early 1900s. But in practice, the experience could become something much darker. Some patients were wrapped tightly in cold, wet sheets, like a cocoon or a mummy, and left immobilized. Others were restrained in tubs while water continuously flowed to maintain temperature. And stories connected to St. Albans describe people spending long periods confined during treatment sessions. Local lore also describes high-pressure water being used in some cases, though details are difficult to independently verify today. Try to imagine that for a second. You're frightened, you don't understand why you're here, you've been told this is supposed to help you, and now you're sitting in a room alone, unable to leave, maybe for hours, maybe longer. Hydrotherapy wasn't the only treatment, though. During this era, hospitals across America also experimented with insulin shock therapy, where patients were intentionally put into comas. Electroconvulsive therapy became more common as well, and later procedures like lobotomies spread through psychiatric medicine because doctors genuinely hoped they had found answers. Some patients improved, and many didn't. And that's the uncomfortable part of places like St. Albans. Many of the people working here probably believed they were actually helping, but history has a way of reminding us that good intentions don't always mean good outcomes. When people visit places like this today, they actually come looking for ghost stories, but standing in rooms where people were restrained, isolated, and treated in ways we'd never accept now, you start to realize that history is unsettling enough without the ghosts. Then we stepped into what was once the alcoholics ward. It's impossible not to compare it to treatment today. If someone struggles with addiction now, we talk about recovery, counseling, support systems, relapse prevention, and treating both the addiction and what caused it. But for much of the early and mid-1900s, that was not the approach. Alcoholism was often seen as a failure of self-control or something families wanted hidden away. Places like this became where people were sent to get better. Treatment often focused on routine, restriction, isolation, and simply removing someone from alcohol without always understanding the mental health, trauma, or circumstances underneath it. And imagine how scary that must have been. No phone, no texting your family, no leaving when you wanted, just arriving here and hoping the people treating you knew what they were doing. Walking through this ward now, you realize how much has changed. Not because addiction got easier, but because we finally started understanding that people struggling with it needed treatment, not punishment. Then we reached the morgue, and it just felt heavier, because up until now, it's easy to walk these halls and imagine stories, but this room isn't a story. This room existed for one reason. At one point in time, this was where someone's chapter ended. St. Albans wasn't just abandoned hallways and ghost tours, it was a working hospital. People came here hoping to heal. Families dropped loved ones off, believing treatment would help, and sometimes they didn't get to bring them home. The exact number of people that died in St. Albans is not known because historical records are just not that widely available, or things are missing, just not there. Another room that is well known inside St. Albans is Jacob's room. So legend says that Jacob was a young boy who was abandoned at St. Albans. He became very attached to a maintenance worker named Donald. At first, Jacob trusted him, but according to the story, that trust turned into something really dark. The story claims that Donald abused Jacob and eventually killed him inside the building. Some versions say he was hidden, some say he was found in his bed. Some say nobody realized what happened for a long time. And over the years, the room became known as Jacob's room. Paranormal investigators often say that Jacob's room is the most active room in the sanatorium. That is why the room is filled with toys. People will bring toys for Jacob and see if they get any kind of reaction. Then we moved into the men's ward, which, as I said before, the rooms here are a lot bigger. They had big closets, just really nice space for what it is compared to the women's ward. Do with that information what you will, just putting it out there. One of the stories people tell about the men's ward is a man sometimes referred to as the Whistler. Nobody seems to agree on who he was. There's no confirmed record connecting one specific patient to the story, but people say they hear whistling echo through the hallway even when nobody else is around. Another story people tell is about a former patient who supposedly spent years in the ward and developed routines so strict that even after he died, people claim they still felt movement in certain rooms at the same times every night. Right off the men's ward, there is an outdoor area, and it's one of the strangest places in the building because at first glance, it kind of feels peaceful. You have open air, natural light, a place to sit outside, but then you realize you're still enclosed. You're outside without really being outside. Places like St. Albans believed fresh air and controlled recreation could help patients. Gardens, walking routines, and time outdoors were considered part of treatment. The reason that it was enclosed, obviously, was so people wouldn't jump off. The freedom was technically right there, but not really. Now, whether they would try to jump off and escape or jump off and take their lives, I don't really know, but it was enclosed, I guess, for both of those reasons. The basement is a pretty creepy area itself. One of the areas in the basement is the bowling alley. There's an underground bowling alley with 2 lanes, which sounds pretty weird for a psychiatric hospital anyway. People claim this is one of the most active places in the building as far as ghosts and paranormal activities, like seeing shadow figures, hearing children laughing, reports of red-eyed figures, people seeing mist appear when certain names are said aloud, and claims of seeing a woman or child walking between lanes. There are also stories that spirits called Allie, or even a missing college student, Gina Renee Hall, are connected to this area, but there's no actual evidence connecting Hall to the building. This is mostly local lore and paranormal legend. The boiler room has the same kind of strange stories. Visitors frequently report feeling touched, hair being pulled, feeling watched, heavy feelings of dread, sudden temperature changes. A supposed entity named Smokey is often connected to the boiler room. Some paranormal groups leave cigarettes here. There was cigarettes all on the floor because they believe this spirit likes them. Others claim the entity isn't human at all. Again, this is paranormal folklore, not documented history. Hydrotherapy rooms are probably one of the creepiest parts because these were actually used. Visitors often talk about seeing old hydrotherapy tubs, former treatment spaces, and small utility rooms connected to patient care. Hydrotherapy wasn't just relaxing baths, it wasn't that at all. It can involve patients spending long periods restrained in tubs or wrapped tightly to calm them. As I said before, seeing the actual equipment down there probably contributes a lot to why people feel uncomfortable. This part is tied much more to real history than ghost stories. The basement hallways are really long and dark, and we actually walked down one of the long hallways they told us to walk down without any of our flashlights or anything on, so just to get a feel of it. It wasn't really that scary to me, but we were there during the day. So people report things from the hallways too, just kind of like the other places. And the basement has lots of old utility spaces and narrow corridors, peeling paint like all over the building anyway, exposed pipes and poor lighting. The phlebotomy room would be associated with drawing blood, testing patients, and general medical procedures. We got to look at that as well, kind of just like a bunch of cupboards and things, I guess, to keep the vials in. One thing that you will notice when you're walking through is a lot of Halloween decorations and those types of things. They do a haunted house every year and they don't really have a lot of storage, so they keep the Halloween decor and scary things like that in certain rooms, which kind of took away from it a little bit, but I understand they don't have a lot of money to pay for storage. I was actually talking to one of the tour guides, and they kind of have to do the haunted houses to help pay for keeping the building up and making sure it doesn't get demolished or just be left to rot. You know, they want to keep these tours going and let people know the history and all of that. So it is important to visit and support and, you know, check out the gift shop and buy stuff there if you can. That was my only thing that really didn't really bother me, but it was just kind of like there, and it took away from the history of it for me. You might not have that problem, but there were a lot of Halloween things there. And that being said, they do Halloween, they do the haunted house at Halloween, they do masquerade balls certain times of the year, but St. Albans also is not open every day of the year. They have certain days that they're open, so you have to check their website and see what days they're open that you can go for a tour. And you also have to, if you want to do the paranormal, like ghost tours at night, you have to book those in advance as well. So just keep all of that in mind when you're visiting or if you plan to visit. As horrifying and as sad as some of the stories are, eventually the lights turn off, the doors lock, and everyone leaves, but the history stays here in this building. It'll never leave. There'll always be a history here. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, after spending time inside St. Albans, you'll probably leave believing something. I felt a sense of sadness. I didn't really get any paranormal or anything like that, but it was just like it's kind of like an overwhelming kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but you'd have to go for yourself and see. And it's even better if you have a small group because you can kind of take it all in more and there's not as many people and it's kind of more personal. Our group was a little bit larger, so I was like the straggler. I was always behind waiting on everybody to walk out so I could go check it out myself. But if you enjoy things like this and getting into the history of places like these and just learning things about dark history and history in general, make sure you follow our Dark History Destination series and subscribe to our channel. And we have a lot of really cool places coming up that I'm really excited to share with you guys.